It was late August of 2019 when I decided to head out on a solo camping trip. I was 33 years old at the time, living in Missouri, and working a job that drained every bit of energy out of me. I hadn't taken time off in almost 2 years. My phone rang all day, emails came in through the night, and no matter how much I got done, it never felt like enough. I was burnt out. All I wanted was some peace and quiet away from everything and everyone. After some searching, I picked a spot in northern Arkansas, Ozark National Forest. There were plenty of secluded places to pitch a tent, and I read that if you wandered off the main trails far enough, you could go days without seeing another person. That sounded perfect. I packed light, just my tent, sleeping bag, a few clothes, a hatchet, fire starter, food, water, and a GPS device. I told a coworker I'd be out there for 5 days and dropped a pin on the map. I left my phone in my truck. I didn't want to be tempted. The drive down was about 5 hours, mostly on highways, but the last stretch was nothing but winding roads and switchbacks through the mountains. Once I got off the main road, it was a narrow dirt path for nearly 20 minutes before I reached the dead end where I planned to hike in. I parked my truck and shouldered my pack, ready to finally breathe again. The hike in wasn't hard, just long. I walked for 3 hours that first day, following a faded trail that was no longer maintained. It ran parallel to a dried creek bed for a while, then cut uphill into a dense pine forest. I didn't see a single soul the entire time. It felt like the kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods. No hum of traffic, no voices, not even birds for long stretches. Just wind and trees. Around 5 p.m., I found a flat spot near a small rock outcropping, not far from a barely trickling spring. I dropped my pack, cleared the area, and set up camp. It was a good spot. Quiet, tucked out of sight, and with easy access to water. The first night was peaceful. I made a small fire, ate some freeze-dried food, and sat against a tree as the sun went down. The sky turned gold, then orange, and finally deep purple. As the stars came out, I lay back and let my body relax in a way I hadn't felt in years. I slept hard. The second day, I spent hiking around the area. I left my tent up and wandered through the woods with a day pack. I found some deer trails, a few patches of wild berries, and even spotted a black bear in the distance, though it didn't notice me. I was careful not to go too far. I didn't want to get turned around. By late afternoon, I made my way back to camp and started a fire for the evening. As the sun dipped, I noticed something odd. Faint marks in the dirt not far from my tent. They looked like scuff marks or maybe boot prints, but they were half washed away from the rain a day earlier. I told myself it was probably mine from the day before, or maybe an animal had stepped through a muddy patch. Still, it felt off. That night, I couldn't sleep as easily. I kept thinking about those marks. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the woods, twigs snapping in the distance, branches creaking in the wind. At one point, I thought I heard something walking near the spring, but I didn't have the nerve to go look. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. The third morning was when things started to really shift. I woke up to find that some of my stuff had been moved. Not stolen, just moved. My hatchet, which I always kept leaned against the tree by the fire pit, was stuck into the trunk. My food bag had been unhooked from where I hung it in a tree and placed neatly on the ground. Nothing was missing, but everything felt wrong. My gut was screaming at me. Something wasn't right. I scanned the area, looking for signs, footprints, torn branches, anything. But there was nothing clear. I tried to convince myself it was a bear, maybe a raccoon. But animals don't carefully move tools. They don't place your food back on the ground without tearing into it. It felt deliberate, and that's what scared me. I should have packed up and left right then, but I didn't. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that I came out here to escape and clear my head, and now I was running from shadows. I spent the day close to camp, chopping firewood, tidying up, keeping myself busy. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement in the trees, a shape ducking behind a trunk, a flicker of something just outside of my vision. But when I looked, there was nothing. No sound, just wind. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up by the fire, clutching the hatchet in my lap, my back against the rock wall. I kept the fire going until the wood ran low. Every sound put me on edge. Around 3 a.m., I thought I saw someone standing between the trees, tall, still, watching. I didn't move. I just stared. Then, after what felt like an hour, they were gone. No sound. Just gone. When the sun finally rose, I packed up. I didn't care about the rest of the trip. I needed to get out. I doused the fire, grabbed my gear, and started hiking. But when I reached the trail I came in on, it was different. There were branches snapped all over, and a large tree had fallen across part of it. I stepped over and kept moving, but the trail didn't feel the same. The markers I remembered: stones, old carved initials in a tree, broken branches. They were missing. I thought I was going the right way, but nothing looked familiar. By mid-morning, I realized I was lost. Completely. I tried my GPS, but it wouldn't connect. I turned back, tried to retrace my steps, but only got more turned around. Panic set in. I forced myself to calm down, to sit and drink some water, to think. I had enough supplies for another 2 days, maybe 3 if I stretched it. I decided to follow the sound of water, figuring it would lead me somewhere. Maybe a bigger stream, maybe back to the creek bed I first followed in. I walked all day, exhausted and tense, jumping at every noise. At one point, I found what looked like another old campsite. Just a ring of stones for a fire pit and some torn-up canvas nearby. It looked abandoned for years, maybe decades. But what chilled me was a carved name in the tree next to it. It wasn't mine, but it matched the initials I saw on a tree when I first came in. The same style, same depth, like someone had gone around carving them all over. That night, I camped in a makeshift spot near the stream. I didn't make a fire. I didn't sleep. I sat with my back against a rock again, the hatchet in hand, scanning the trees. I didn't see anyone, but I felt it. That same pressure, that same watching sensation. The next morning, I walked again. I was tired, hungry, and my feet were blistered, but I didn't stop. Around mid-afternoon, I finally heard something different. An engine. It was faint, far away, but it was real. I followed the sound uphill until I stumbled out onto a gravel service road. I collapsed onto my knees. 10 minutes later, a forest ranger drove up and found me. I must have looked like hell. He gave me water and called it in. They took me to a station, checked me over, and I told them where I'd been. When I gave them the coordinates of where I camped, he paused. He said that area was unofficially marked off. Not because it was unsafe, but because years ago, there had been reports of people getting lost out there, finding weird things, even going missing. Not enough to shut it down, but enough for the regulars to avoid it. I never went camping alone again. I still go out, but always with someone else. And I always tell more than one person where I'll be. I never figured out who or what was out there with me, but I know this much. Someone moved my stuff, someone watched me at night, and someone didn't want me to find my way out. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't anything supernatural. It was a person, a real person living or hiding in those woods. That's what haunts me most, because I'll never know what they wanted or what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. It was a quiet September afternoon when I decided to go camping. The air was crisp, the kind of chill that makes you want to breathe deeply and feel it fill your lungs. I had spent the past few weeks feeling like I was drowning in the noise and busyness of everyday life. Work had been grueling, and I hadn't had much time for myself. So I decided to escape for the weekend. Just me, my tent, and the wide open wilderness. I'd never camped in this particular part of the forest before. It was a little off the beaten path, tucked deep in a valley in the northern part of Idaho. I had seen it on a map during a stop at a local gas station and thought it looked interesting. The forest seemed dense and untouched, a place where I could find some peace. I wasn't planning on hiking far or doing anything extreme. Just a quiet weekend, away from everything. I set off on Friday afternoon, my old truck rattling as I made my way up the winding, dirt road toward the site. The sun was already low in the sky by the time I found the turnoff, a narrow trail leading deeper into the trees. The gravel road was rough, the kind that made the truck bounce and shake with each bump. I kept my eyes on the path, the trees growing taller as I drove further into the woods. Eventually, I found a clearing by a small creek. It was perfect, not too far from the road, but far enough that I couldn't hear the traffic anymore. I parked the truck and unloaded my gear, setting up camp beside the creek. My tent was a small two-person tent, just big enough for me and a small bag of gear. I didn't need anything fancy. I hadn't been camping in a while, but I still remembered how to set up camp. By the time the tent was up and the campfire was crackling, it was getting dark. I sat back and watched the flames dance, the wood snapping and popping as it burned. The sound of the creek flowing nearby was soothing, almost meditative. I roasted some hot dogs over the fire and made a small pot of coffee. It was simple, but it was exactly what I needed. As the night went on, the forest seemed to come alive. The wind rustled the leaves above me, and every now and then, I would hear the distant call of an owl or the rustling of something moving in the underbrush. It wasn't anything unusual, just the normal sounds of the woods at night. The temperature had dropped, and I zipped my jacket up to my chin. I sat there, staring into the fire, until the warmth of the flames was the only thing keeping me from feeling the chill of the night creeping in. At some point, I began to feel like I wasn't alone. It was the kind of feeling that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I tried to shake it off. After all, I was out in the wilderness, and it was natural to feel that way sometimes. But the feeling lingered, like someone or something was watching me. I tried to ignore it, finishing my coffee and cleaning up the small mess around the fire. It wasn't long before I decided to crawl into my tent and try to get some sleep. The sound of the creek was still calming, and the night was peaceful. I thought about how nice it would be to just sleep and forget about everything for a while. But that's when I heard it. A rustling sound. Not from the trees this time, but from the ground. Like something large moving through the underbrush. I froze. The sound was too close. Too deliberate. It wasn't the wind, and it wasn't an animal. I lay there in the dark, holding my breath, trying to listen. The noise was unmistakable now. Footsteps. Slow, cautious, like something was moving in my direction. My heart started pounding in my chest. I grabbed the flashlight beside me and turned it on, aiming the beam at the entrance of the tent. But there was nothing, just the shadowy outline of the trees and the night. The footsteps stopped. For a long time, there was nothing but the sound of my own breathing, shallow and quick. I felt my pulse racing, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I didn't know what to do. Was it a bear? Person? I hadn't seen anyone else on my way in, but there were a few campsites farther down the road. Maybe someone had wandered off the trail. I stayed as still as I could, listening intently. The footsteps never came back, and eventually, the night fell silent again. I didn't feel like I could sleep after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that noise again in my mind. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, clutching the flashlight in my hand, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Eventually, I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes again, the sun was starting to rise. The forest was eerily quiet. The birds hadn't started chirping yet. I stepped outside, the ground wet with dew. The air was colder than it had been the night before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there with me. I packed up my gear quickly, my eyes constantly scanning the forest around me. The campsite felt different in the daylight. Less comforting, more foreboding. But there was no sign of anyone, nothing out of place. I told myself I was just being paranoid, and it was probably nothing more than an animal moving around. I started my truck and headed back down the road, eager to put the whole thing behind me. But as I made my way toward the main road, something caught my eye. There, in the mud beside my truck, were large footprints. Too large to be human, but not quite animal either. I got out of the truck and walked over to examine them. The prints were deep, like something heavy had been standing there. They didn't look like any animal I knew of. The toes were wide and spread out in an odd way, and the shape wasn't consistent with a bear or any other creature I'd seen in the area. I felt my stomach drop. The hairs on my neck stood up again. There was no mistaking it. Whatever had been out there, it had followed me. I didn't stick around to analyze it further. I got in the truck and left, I don't know what was out there in the woods that night, but I wasn't willing to find out. As I drove back down the dirt road and left the forest behind me, I could still feel that strange sense of being watched. Looking back now, I still can't explain what happened. Maybe it was just my nerves playing tricks on me, or maybe there was something in the woods that I wasn't meant to understand. Either way, I haven't been back to that place since. It's been a few years now, and I still think about that night sometimes. The sound of the footsteps, the footprints in the mud. What was out there? Why did it follow me? And most importantly, why did I feel so sure that I wasn't alone? The one thing I know for sure is that some places are better left unexplored. It was the summer of 2011 when I decided to take a week off work and go camping alone in northern Minnesota. I was 32 at the time, working a stressful job in Minneapolis, and I needed a break. I didn't want a resort or anything commercial. I wanted a quiet, isolated place where I could just sit with my thoughts and breathe without the noise of the city. I picked a state forest I'd never been to before, a few hours north of Duluth. The name doesn't matter. It wasn't a well-known place, and that's exactly what I was looking for. I spent hours online going through topo maps and forums until I found a primitive campsite near a small lake tucked away in the trees. No cell service, no park rangers, no designated camp pads. Just a flat clearing and a fire ring someone had built out of river rocks years ago. I packed up my truck with what I needed: tent, sleeping bag, food, water filter, small cooler, axe, knife, first aid kit, and a camp stove. I brought my old aluminum canoe too, strapped to the roof. I left early on a Tuesday morning, hoping to beat the weekend crowd, even though I doubted anyone else would be camping out there. The last few miles to the trailhead were rough. The gravel road turned to packed dirt, then narrowed until grass grew down the middle. I passed no other cars, no signs of people. The trail to the site was about a mile long, mostly flat, winding through thick woods of pine and birch. It was quiet except for the crunch of my boots and the occasional bird call. The campsite was better than I hoped. It sat right on the edge of the lake, a few steps from the water. There was an old log someone had dragged over for sitting, and the fire ring was still intact. The lake was small, maybe 200 yards across, and surrounded by trees on all sides. It looked like a mirror when the wind wasn't blowing. I set up my tent on the flattest spot I could find and spent the afternoon paddling around the lake, casting a line every now and then, though I didn't really care if I caught anything. That first night I sat by the fire, listening to the breeze in the trees, feeling the stress melt off me. The first 2 days were peaceful. I fished, cooked simple meals, took long naps in the sun, and read a book I had barely touched in months. But by the third night, things started to feel different. It began with sounds in the woods. At first I told myself it was deer or raccoons. I've camped enough to know animals move around at night, and the woods can sound louder than they are when you're alone. But something felt off. The sounds weren't random. They were slow, methodical, heavy, like footsteps, not running or bounding, just steady movement. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in my tent with my flashlight on, listening. Every time I was about to drift off, I'd hear a branch snap or leaves crunch, and my eyes would snap open again. I told myself it was in my head. I've been alone too long, maybe. My brain playing tricks. The next morning I found scuffed dirt not far from my tent. Not a paw print, not quite a boot mark either. Just something disturbed. I brushed it off. Probably an animal. That afternoon I hiked around the far side of the lake. I found a trail that didn't show up on my maps. Faint, barely a trail at all. Just grass and leaves trampled down in a way that told me something or someone had walked there many times. I followed it for about 20 minutes before the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I don't know why. I didn't hear anything, but I felt watched. I turned back. That evening I didn't start a fire. I kept my dinner cold, sat in the dark with my flashlight off. I listened. The forest felt too quiet. No owls, no wind, no frogs. Just stillness, until I heard the steps again. Closer this time. I sat frozen, hand on my axe, watching the trees. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Something was there. I slept in short bursts, fully dressed with the axe on my chest. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed up fast, stuffing my gear into the backpack and heading out. The trail back felt longer than I remembered. Halfway down it, I stopped. I saw something hanging from a tree up ahead. It was a piece of blue tarp, knotted and torn, dangling from a branch. Underneath it, tucked behind the trunk, I found what looked like a makeshift shelter. Just a lean-to made from branches and a ripped sleeping bag inside. It had clearly been there for a while. It stank, like sweat and mildew and something else I couldn't place. I didn't stop to investigate. I walked faster, heart pounding, and didn't stop until I reached my truck. The road out felt like a lifeline. I didn't even glance in the rear view. Back home, I told myself it was probably a squatter. Someone living off-grid, maybe mentally unstable, maybe just protective of their space. But even now, years later, I don't like thinking about those nights. I've camped since then, but never alone and never that far out. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I had stayed one more night, or followed that trail deeper. But I didn't. I got out. I got home safe, and that's all that matters. I never reported the shelter. I never went back. I don't care if no one believes me. I was there. I felt what I felt. And I'm done looking for quiet places in the middle of nowhere. Some silences aren't peaceful. They're warnings. It was the summer of 2016, and I had just turned 32. I'd been working nonstop at my job in Dayton, Ohio, barely taking time off in over a year. Everything was routine: wake up, work, sleep, repeat. I felt burned out and knew I needed to step away for a while. I started planning a solo camping trip, something quiet and disconnected from the world. No phone, no laptop, just me and the woods. I chose a small, lesser-known state forest in northern Pennsylvania. It wasn't far from the border, about a 6-hour drive. The place didn't have a website or much information online, but that was the appeal. It wasn't packed with RVs or noisy families. It had basic campsites and a few old trails, nothing fancy. I found a topo map of the area online and printed it out. The plan was to hike into the forest a few miles and set up camp by one of the streams that ran through the eastern ridge. I packed simple: a small tent, sleeping bag, food for 4 days, a compact stove, water purifier, bear spray, and a good knife. I wasn't new to the outdoors. I'd done plenty of hikes and overnights before, just never alone for this long. I left early Thursday morning and got to the forest entrance by noon. The parking area was just a dirt pull-off with room for maybe 4 or 5 vehicles. Mine was the only one there. I threw my pack over my shoulders and headed into the woods. The trail was barely a trail, more like a footpath that hadn't been used in a while. Fallen branches, wet leaves, and the occasional washed-out section slowed me down, but I wasn't in a rush. The air was thick with the smell of damp soil and pine. I saw a few deer and once caught sight of a black snake slithering away into the brush. By late afternoon, I reached a flat, mossy patch of land next to a slow-moving stream. It looked like a good spot to set up camp, so I pitched my tent and started boiling water for dinner. That first night was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no frogs, no crickets, just the stream gurgling softly nearby. I thought it was strange, but I chalked it up to the time of year or maybe a cold front moving in. I read for a bit by flashlight, then turned in around 10. I woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of crunching leaves. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, soft steps moving through the brush. I stayed still, listening. I circled the camp once, slowly, and then the noise stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I found nothing out of place. No tracks, no broken branches, no sign of an animal. I convinced myself it was probably a deer, maybe 2. Still, I felt off. I almost packed up right then, but I reminded myself I came out here to get away, to reset. I forced myself to stay. The second day, I explored the area. I followed the stream for a few miles until it veered sharply east and disappeared between 2 steep hills. I climbed a bit to get a better view and found an old fire ring, just a circle of stones half buried in dirt and leaves. It looked like it hadn't been used in years. Nearby, I spotted the collapsed remains of what looked like a small wooden shack, just a few rotted beams and some rusty nails. I didn't think much of it. It's not unusual to find old structures out in the woods. That night, I set up a perimeter with a few noisy things. An old tin cup on a string tied to a tree, some pebbles stacked on top of each other. I figured if something came through again, I'd at least hear it. I cooked, ate, and crawled into my tent just after sunset. Again, I woke up to the sound of movement. This time it was heavier, like someone walking slowly and carefully. The cup on the string clinked once, then silence. I gripped my knife inside my sleeping bag and stayed perfectly still. I didn't hear breathing, didn't see a shadow, just those careful steps and the feeling that someone or something was standing just outside my tent. I didn't sleep at all after that. Morning came slow. When I finally stepped out, I found the cup on the ground and the string snapped. The pebbles were scattered. No tracks, no claw marks, just small signs someone had passed through. I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't shake. My instincts were screaming that I shouldn't be there anymore. But I stayed one more night. The third day, I barely wandered. I stayed close to camp, checking the area every hour or so. I kept my knife close and made sure my bear spray was always on me. I gathered more firewood than I needed and built a larger fire. I wanted light. I wanted noise. I cooked everything I had left that didn't require boiling and stacked the rest of the food high up in a tree. I didn't care if I had to hike out hungry the next day. I just needed that night to pass. But that night was different. I woke up not to sound, but to the absence of it. No wind, no water movement, total stillness. I opened my eyes and noticed the tent looked slightly brighter than usual, like something was reflecting light from outside. I unzipped the tent just a little and peeked out. There was a flashlight beam sweeping slowly across the trees, maybe 50 feet away. It moved methodically, left to right, then down to the ground, then back up. I froze. My mind raced. No one was supposed to be out here. This forest wasn't patrolled. The nearest ranger station was 20 miles away. I hadn't seen another person in 3 days. Then I saw him. A man, maybe late 40s. Thin. He was walking slowly with a flashlight and what looked like a hatchet in his other hand. He wasn't calling out, wasn't searching like someone lost. He was just walking, scanning the woods, like he was looking for something. I backed into the tent and zipped it shut slowly, praying the sound wouldn't carry. I put on my shoes and grabbed my knife and spray. I doused the fire as quietly as I could and waited. The light kept moving, closer, closer. Then it stopped. For what felt like 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then it swept back toward the stream and disappeared. I didn't wait for sunrise. I packed in the dark, shoved everything in my pack, left the tent behind, and started moving west. I didn't follow the trail. I just moved as straight and fast as I could toward where I knew the road was. I fell more than once, got cut up by thorns, slid down a wet embankment and twisted my ankle bad. But I didn't stop. I finally reached the dirt lot just after 10 a.m. My car was still there. Nothing broken. Nothing moved. I got in and locked the doors before catching my breath. I looked back at the tree line once before starting the car and driving off. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station near Eerie. I didn't report anything. What would I say? That someone walked through the woods with a flashlight and a hatchet? That's not illegal, but it felt wrong, deeply wrong, like he wasn't just passing through. I haven't gone camping alone since then. I still hike, sometimes with friends, but I stay away from places without people now. I don't think I was supposed to be found. I think whoever he wasn't looking to make friends. And I don't think I was the first person he searched for in those woods. That trip changed how I feel about being alone in nature. It's not the bears or the weather that scare me anymore. It's the people. The ones who don't make noise. The ones who don't belong there. The ones you only see when it's already too late. I had always loved the idea of camping. There was something calming about being surrounded by nature. The crisp air, the rustling of trees, and the sound of a nearby stream. It was just me, my gear, and the wilderness, no distractions, no worries. I had taken countless solo trips into the woods over the years, each one more rewarding than the last. This trip, though, would prove to be something different, something I wasn't prepared for. It was late September, the kind of time when the days were still warm but the nights began to take on that cool, crisp bite. I was about 30 miles north of a small town called Rivorton, nestled deep in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The area wasn't heavily trafficked, especially this time of year, when most people had moved on to the more accessible trails. I had chosen this particular spot because it offered solitude. The trailhead was small, only a handful of people used it each year. That's how I liked it. No noise, no distractions, just the sound of nature. The drive there had been long. My old truck creaked with every bump along the narrow, dirt roads, and the tires kicked up small clouds of dust behind me. The forest stretched for miles on either side, dense and impenetrable. The only sign of life I saw was a deer darting across the road near dusk. The sun had set a little over an hour ago, and the dimming light was quickly being replaced by the long shadows of night. I parked my truck at the trailhead and unloaded my gear, tent, sleeping bag, stove, water filter, and a few cans of food. I was planning on a 2-night stay. The campsite I had chosen was just a short hike from the trailhead. I knew the area well enough that I didn't need a map, though I always made sure to keep my compass handy just in case. The air was cool as I started down the trail, the path littered with leaves and the occasional rock. The forest around me was alive, the distant hoots of owls and the chirps of insects filling the night air. I felt at ease as I hiked, the rhythmic sound of my boots hitting the ground accompanied by the occasional crack of a twig in the distance. By the time I reached the clearing where I planned to camp, it was fully dark. The moon was visible, hanging low and casting pale light across the ground. I set up my tent quickly, grateful for the years of practice I had in this task. My small camp stove sputtered to life as I heated up a meal, the faint smell of canned beans and beef stew mixing with the earthy scent of the woods. I ate quickly, the warmth of the food comforting against the cool night air. Once finished, I cleaned up and stowed everything back in my bag, trying to keep things as tidy as possible. I sat for a while by the fire, watching the flames dance in the small circle of rocks. It was peaceful, almost hypnotic, but as the fire burned down, I felt a shift in the air. The usual sounds of the forest seemed to fade. The insects had stopped singing, and the wind had died down completely. It was unnervingly quiet. At first, I chalked it up to my imagination. The forest had a way of making you feel small and vulnerable, and at times the silence could be unsettling. But something felt different tonight. A strange tension hung in the air, thick like a fog. I glanced around, trying to make sense of it, but the shadows between the trees gave nothing away. I decided it was time to turn in for the night. I snuffed out the fire, leaving only the faint smell of smoke in the air. I zipped up my tent and settled into my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the discomfort gnawing at me. My mind raced, picking apart every little sound, every creak of the trees, every rustle of leaves. The night seemed to stretch on forever, my thoughts swirling as I lay in the darkness. Sleep didn't come easily, not with that feeling hanging over me, but eventually, exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a fitful sleep.